Hey guys, we have reached it to our final portion of our tissues lecture over chapter 4. So we're going to be talking about muscular tissues today and nervous tissues. So first up, we have muscular tissues. All right, so all muscle tissues are highly vascularized, which means that they contain a lot of blood vessels. They are responsible for most types of movement of the body. So muscle cells possess these things called myofilaments that are actually made up of actin fibers and myosin as well. These are two different types of proteins that bring about contraction. So you know that you have to have kind of like a flex and a release. So this is helping to bring about contraction. Okay, and there's 3 different types of muscle tissues that we're going to talk about specifically today. These are the skeletal muscle, if I could speak, that'd be great. Skeletal muscles, the cardiac muscles, and the smooth muscles. Okay, so the first one is going to be our skeletal muscles. All right, so in skeletal muscle tissue, these tissues are going to be attached to and cause the movement of our bones. So the skeletal muscles are attached to the skeleton. This makes sense, okay? They're also called voluntary muscles. They're called voluntary muscles because it's something that can be consciously controlled. You have the option of if you want to move that muscle or not. You have control over it. It is a voluntary muscle because you control it. Okay, the skeletal muscle tissues, the cells are called muscle fibers here. So the cells are kind of long, elongated cells. That's why they're called muscle fibers. They can contain multiple nuclei and they appear to be striated or kind of like stripy or banded. So here's what we're talking about. Skeletal muscles. So this is actually a picture of the banding patterns that you can see in our skeletal muscles. So you can see that you have the part of the muscle fiber up here, and it's a cell. We have our nuclei that have our, we have multiple nuclei in our cells. We have striations, which are these like little bands. It kind of looks like a vertical striped pink shirt, if you ask me. That's kind of what this looks like. Okay, so the description here is that we have long cylindrical multinucleated cells, and we have striations, which are these bands or these stripes that you can see going on here. The function here is for voluntary movement. Again, this is movement that you can control. Locomotion, manipulation of the environment, facial expressions, and voluntary control. So again, all of these are attached to your bones. You have the choice of moving these muscles. This particular location you can see in the picture, we have these muscles, the skeletal muscles, are attached to bones or occasionally to the skin. And when it was referring to more of like facial expression, that's where it's kind of talking about attachment to the skin. Okay, our second kind of muscle is going to be cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle refers to the heart. Okay, so it's found only in the walls of the heart. It is involuntary muscle movement, right? Because you can't be like, oh, okay, heart, it's time to beat. We're going to beat now. Okay, but now stop. You can't control that. That's not something that you can control, whether that is beating or not, right? So that is involuntary movement. So it's an involuntary muscle. So like our skeletal muscles, this contains striations, so those stripes, the banding patterns, but the cells only have one nucleus. So this is a big difference between the two of them. And the cells can have many branches that join branches of other cardiac cells, kind of like this little like network, like little fingers that make a little network. Okay, we'll look at that in a second. We have intercalated discs that are special joints where the cardiac cells are joined together. So let's look at a picture of that. Okay, so you can see the little discs here. They look like these like little vertical stripes. Okay, you can still see a little bit of the striation pattern happening. You can see one nucleus in our cells here. So this is a picture of cardiac muscle. Our description is that we have branching, striated, generally uninucleate cells, which means one nucleus within these cells. Okay, and then we have specialized junctions called these intercalated discs that are going to, you can see another like cartoon picture of this here. They're like the little like darker bands here that kind of like join the cells together. Okay, so you can see them on here as well. Okay, so you can see the differences between our cells. We have our our skeletal muscle here, and this has our vertical bands, kind of like a little stripy, like I said, it reminds me of kind of like a striped shirt. And then this is our cardiac muscle, okay, so only found in the heart. So our function here is as it contracts, it propels blood to the circulation, into circulation, so part of your circulatory system. It's going to be pumping blood. It's going to be receiving blood from the body and then pumping blood back out to the rest of your body. And this is involuntary because, again, you cannot be like, all right, heart, time to beat. It doesn't work like that, okay? But we have our cardiac muscle here, and these are, of course, located, these tissues are, of course, inside of the walls of your heart. Okay, next type, we have smooth muscle tissue. So this is found mainly in the walls of hollow organs that are other than the heart. So the heart is the only place that we'd have our cardiac muscle tissues, but smooth muscles are going to be found on the walls of our other hollow organs. Again, this is going to be involuntary muscle movement because you cannot control when your organs are going to be, contracting. Okay, there's no visible striations, the stripes, the banding on our smooth muscles. Think about it, smooth. There's no bands, it's just smooth. Okay, and we have spindle-shaped cells with only one nucleus here. So let's take a look at those. So here we have our smooth muscle. You can see that there's no like striping patterns. It doesn't look like a striped t-shirt anymore. You can see that you have our smooth muscle cells with our one nuclei in each cell. So those are those dark elongated, they're kind of, long cells, as you can see up here. Okay, they call them spindle-shaped elongated cells. All muscle cells are more of like an oblong shape. Okay, with a central nucleus here. There's no striations, so no striping, banding patterns. And then we have our cells here that are arranged in sheets. Okay, so we have the function is to propel substances or objects like food, urine, a baby, along internal passageways. And this is involuntary control. I'll give you an example of like with the baby. A baby grows where? It grows inside the uterus. And when it's time to push that baby out, you have a positive feedback mechanism that's causing the body to release hormones in order to make the uterus contract and push that baby out. You can't be like, okay, uterus, time to flex. You can't control it. It's completely involuntary. So it is controlled by things like hormones, like chemical signals. Okay, so our location here, again, is mostly in the walls of hollow organs. Think about your foodstuffs. This is going to be your digestive tract, your urinary system. You have your bladder, right? You have a baby is in your body. It's growing inside of your uterus. Okay, so these are all of our hollow organs that are involved in these processes here, okay? Again, this is our last type. This is our smooth muscle tissue. Okay, the last type of tissue we're going to talk about is called nervous tissue. So our nervous tissue is the main component of our nervous system. Well, that makes sense. And when we're talking about our nervous system, we're talking about our major organs like the brain, the spinal cord, and our nerves, of course. And the purpose here is to help to regulate and control bodily functions. So we have two specialized cells that we're going to talk about. So we have neurons, which are specialized nerve cells that generate and conduct nerve impulses. Okay, and then these are accompanied by our supporting cells that help to support, insulate, and protect neurons. Okay, so this is what our nervous tissue looks like. So here you can see that we have the supporting cells are going to be like all these like smaller cells in the background. You can kind of see that there's like little more round or cuboidal almost shapes, and you can see the nuclei in them. And then these guys, they kind of look like kites to me, like kites with the tail. Okay, these are your neurons. Okay, we have the cell body of a neuron, and then all of these little like fibers that are coming off of them are the neuron processes. Okay, this is where we're going to be sending signals along long pathways here. Okay, so our description is that neurons are branching cells, and you can see all of the branching here. It looks like all these like hair-like fibers that are coming off. The cell processes that can be really, really long extend from the nucleus-containing cell body. You have very, very long of these little branching finger extensions here on our neurons. There's a really, really long one that's in your leg that controls all of like the little nerve fibers in your foot. Okay, so here, so they're calling this the neuron processes here. Our little dendrites are going to be like little tiny finger-like extensions that come off of the cell body itself. You have the axon here. Okay, so we have the function is going to be that the neurons are going to transmit electrical signals from sensory receptors to an effector. Okay, so these are like muscles and glands, and then supporting cells support and protect the neurons. So we have these like large cells that we're like focusing on, be like, okay, cool, that's a neuron. Then all those little tiny supporting cells around in the background are going to help with the support and protection of our neurons. Okay, so the location that we're talking about, of course, in the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. These are the main players when we're talking about the nervous system, and the nervous system is made up of our, nervous tissue. Okay, so covering and lining membranes, we're going to talk about a couple different examples of that here. So we have our covering and lining membranes that are composed of at least two primary tissues. It's an epithelium bound to underlying connective tissue proper layers. There's three different types of these that we're going to talk about. So cutaneous membranes, mucous membranes, and serous membranes. Okay, so this is actually going to be our last section of covering and lining membranes. Our cutaneous membranes here, it's another name for skin. Okay, your skin's your largest organ. It's on the outside of your body, and it protects you by keeping what's supposed to be inside in and what's outside out. Okay, so again, cutaneous membranes, it's another name for your skin. It's keratinized and stratified squamous epithelium. So that's your epidermis, or the outermost part of your skin, because you know that there's different layers, that's attached to a thick layer of connective tissue, and that connective tissue is called the dermis. So notice that it's both the epithelial tissues and our connective tissues working together here. So unlike other membranes, the skin is a dry membrane. We've talked about moist linings when we talked about the epithelial tissues previously, and our connective tissues as well. There's a lot of water and viscosity there. So the skin is actually a dry membrane. So your cutaneous membrane is going to be dry. Here's an example of this. It's the skin, it covers the body, it's on the outside. We also have mucous membranes. So mucosa indicates the location, not cell composition. So we're talking about specific locations. So they're going to line body cavities that are open to the exterior. Okay, so your digestive tract, your respiratory tract, your urogenital tracts, these are all lined by mucous membranes because they have some sort of opening on the exterior of the body. There's something that's going to interact with the exterior environment at times. So these are moist membranes that are bathed in secretions or urine. So like if you're talking about your, we'll say digestive tract, like your mouth is going to be a large part of that, right? You have saliva that's coating it. It's a moist membrane. Okay, respiratory, you're talking about your nose and your mouth, right? Again, you have like snot and stuff like that that's in your nose and all those little hairs to help filter things, but you get boogers. These are moist, and it's just kind of like trying to protect what's coming, protect your body from what's coming in. Okay, so these are moist membranes that are bathed in some sort of secretion, typically, or urine. Okay, so epithelial sheets are going to lie over a layer of loose connective tissue. Okay, so we have, again, the interrelationship between the epithelial tissues and our connective tissues, and a lot of these secrete mucus. So here's an example here. Our mucous membranes line the body cavities that are open to the exterior. And like I was talking about before, with the nasal cavity, you have your mouth, the esophageal linings, and so on. Our serous membranes here are also called serosa. They're found in closed ventral body cavities. They're constructed from simple squamous epithelium called mesothelium. And we talked about mesothelium and endothelium in the first section when we talked about epithelial tissues. So this is resting on thin areolar connective tissue. Again, you see that relationship between the epithelial tissues and the connective tissues. So these are our covering and lining tissues that depend on both of these two tissues. We have parietal serosa and visceral serosa that we talked about in the very, very first unit of this class. Our parietal serosa line the internal body cavity walls, whereas the visceral serosa, the visceral serosa actually covers the organs themselves. So you have two coverings, one that's around the cavity and one that's around the organ. The cavity between these two layers is filled with the slippery serous fluid. So these are moist membranes, and all of that serous fluid and everything is there to cushion your body. Okay, you don't want your organs just like slamming up against each other. You have these like little pillow pockets of fluid around them. We have special names given to show our locations here. We have like the pleura. We're talking about lungs, pericardium. We're talking about heart, peritoneum. We're talking about the abdomen, abdominal region. So all of these have specific location, specific names. We've talked about these, and we talked about the body cavities and anatomical directions back in chapter 1. So here's a picture of all of this for you. So our serous membranes are membranes that line the body cavities that are close to the exterior. Okay, so this is different from the previous tissues that we have talked about. So you can see we have our parietal pericardium, our visceral pericardium, whether it is lining the cavity or whether it's lining the organ itself, and so on. When we're talking about the peritoneum, talking about all of those organs in our ventral cavity. Okay, lastly, we're going to discuss tissue repair. So when the body's barriers are compromised, the inflammatory and immune responses are activated. So our body is made up of cells, and these cells work together to form our tissues. And we've just talked about all the different types of tissues that are in our body. Now, these tissues form our organs, and our organs form our organ systems that all connect and work together and communicate in order to maintain homeostasis in our organism of ourselves, right? So when there's any component that is compromised, any of these tissues that are compromised in any way, we have an inflammatory and immune response in order to try to fix that damage. So repair starts very, very quickly, and the repair is the function of the inflammatory response. So repair can occur in two different ways. Okay, we have regeneration and we have fibrosis. So regeneration is when we have the same kind of tissue replaces destroyed tissue. So original function is restored. Okay, so it's just like, oh, hey, you skinned your knee? Great. We're going to grow some more knee skin. Mitosis is a beautiful thing. Okay, fibrosis is when we have connective tissue replaces destroyed tissue, and original function can be lost in these cases, and we'll look at that in a little bit. So step one, we have inflammation. It's going to set the stage. So first, inflammation. It's the release of inflammatory chemicals that are going to cause dilation of blood vessels and an increase in blood vessel permeability. We're also going to see clotting of blood. Of course, if you are breaking like your, cutaneous membrane on your skin, your blood's going to clot. You don't just want it leaking out all over the place. Same thing if you're going to be damaging blood vessels. You don't want your blood leaking out all over the place, so we're going to have blood clotting. So here's an example. Okay, so inflammation sets the stage. We have severed blood vessels that bleed. Okay, the inflammatory chemicals are released by injured tissue cells, mast cells, and other types of cells. Local blood vessels become more permeable, allowing white blood cells, fluid, clotting proteins, and other plasma proteins to seep into the injured area. And then clotting occurs. The surface exposed to air dries and forms a scab. Now, the scab is actually formed by platelets in your blood. Step two is going to be the organization. We're going to be restoring blood supply. Okay, so organization begins with the blood clot and is replaced with granulation tissue. So this is new capillary-rich tissue. So the epithelium begins to regenerate. Fibroblasts produce collagen fibers to bridge the gap until regeneration is complete. And then any leftover little debris or particles are going to be phagocytized by our cells. So here's what's happening here. So after our initial damage, you can kind of see that we still have the scab in place, but things are starting to change underneath that layer. So organization restores the blood supply. So the clot is replaced by granulation tissue, which restores the vascular supply. Fibroblasts produce collagen fibers that start to bridge the gap. Macrophages phagocytize our dead and dying cells and other debris that's present. And surface epithelial cells multiply and migrate over the granulation tissue. Step three, we have regeneration and fibrosis affect permanent repair. So the scab is going to detach. This is why you don't pick your scabs, because the scab is supposed to be there for protection. Don't pick it. It's gross. Okay? So the scab is going to fall off. It detaches on its own without being picked. Our fibrous tissue matures. Epithelium is going to thicken, begins to resemble the adjacent tissue. So we're just going to be replacing those tissues. Okay, and then it results in a fully regenerated epithelium with underlying scar tissue, which may or may not be visible. So here's what that's looking like here. So you can tell the scab is gone because it fell off naturally and was not picked off. So regeneration and fibrosis affect permanent repair. So we have the area, the fibrosed area that matures and contracts, and the epithelium is going to thicken up. And then the fully regenerated epithelium with an underlying area of scar tissue is going to be the result here of our regenerated epithelial tissues. Tissues that regenerate extremely well include things like our epithelial tissues, our bones, our areolar connective tissue, dense regular connective tissue, and blood-forming tissue. A lot of things that are highly vascularized are going to just like heal faster and be able to regenerate faster over time. Tissue with moderate regenerating capacity is going to be like our smooth muscle and dense regular connective tissue. Okay, so these are tissues with virtually no functional regenerative capacity. So our cardiac muscle and nervous tissue of brain and spinal cord. So this especially happens as you get older, not so much when you're like a little kid. Our cardiac muscles and our nervous tissues are going to be at greater risk. Like once they're damaged, they don't heal properly. That damage is typically permanent. So new research shows cell division does occur and effects are underway to coax them to regenerate better. So there are chemical signals that are released between cells to kind of communicate which ones are dividing, which ones are not. So seems like research is now going to be working on a way to kind of coax some of those other cells to start regenerating by going through mitotic divisions and things like that, whereas maybe they stop receiving the signal in these particular tissues. We made it to the end of tissues. This was the end of part 3 of tissues. Make sure that you check the online schedule because our test did get moved up a little bit, but it'll be better for you in the long run. Thank you and have a great day.